Rivergate Springs, at first glance, looked like the epitome of American suburban peace. Lush oaks lined the gently winding streets. Matching mailboxes stood in uniform rows. Children biked freely, residents tended their flower beds, and the local park teemed with life on sunny weekends. Part of the neighborhood's careful upkeep and harmony stemmed from the Rivergate Springs Homeowners Association, HOA, which enforced strict codes on house paint colors, hedge heights, and even the types of welcome mats allowed. Tucked at one end of the neighborhood was a modest retirement complex, Elmridge Seniors Residences. It wasn't large, just 3 low-rise buildings encircled by neat lawns, small walking paths, and communal porches where residents chatted. The older folks who lived there cherished the sense of safety and neighborly kindness. They also abided by the HOA rules, though the complex had some exceptions for accessibility. Wheelchair ramps, handrails, and wide entryways abounded, ensuring no older resident felt trapped by steps. For several years, Elmridge Seniors Residences coexisted happily with Rivergate Springs' broader community. Then, Judith Harrington, an outspoken middle-aged homeowner on the HOA board, began to turn a critical eye toward the seniors. In her mind, their unsightly ramps were out of step with the neighborhood's sleek aesthetic. She found them ugly and believed they blocked the pleasing view of the complex's landscaping from the street. As a leading and often forceful board member, Judith had the power to cause real trouble. But at that stage, the friction remained invisible to most residents. They saw the seniors come and go, greeting them politely. No one guessed that behind closed doors, Judith, known behind her back as Karen, was plotting ways to remove or hide the ramps entirely. And soon, she would cross a line so bold it would shake the entire community. Judith Harrington personified the so-called Karen archetype, fervently sure of her correctness, always fixated on trivial rule violations, and brimming with self-importance. In her early 50s, she carried herself with a rigid posture, hair trimmed into a severe bob. She rarely smiled except in that tight, forced way that suggested disapproval was lurking just beneath. Judith had moved into Rivergate Springs a few years back, quickly inserting herself onto the HOA board. She claimed she simply wanted to preserve property values and maintain a refined atmosphere. But in practice, she micromanaged neighbors' yard gnomes, patio furniture, and even the types of wreaths allowed on doors. Her frequent letters used language like cease and desist from further aesthetic disruption. Most neighbors dismissed her bossiness as little more than a nuisance. After all, common sense prevailed among the board's other members, like the friendly HOA president, Gloria Shepard, and the down-to-earth treasurer, Morris Campbell. They occasionally voted in line with Judith if the rule in question was standard, but they also overruled her more extreme proposals. Yet Judith's obsession with ramp removal at Elmridge Seniors Residences began to consume her. She insisted the multiple ramps outside each building's main entrance were overkill. In reality, the architects had installed them so that every door had a step-free route, vital for seniors who used walkers or wheelchairs. But Judith saw them as eyesores. She believed a single, central ramp might be enough, and all others could be dismantled. The seniors politely pushed back, explaining that redundancy was crucial. If one ramp was blocked or under repair, residents still needed safe access. When her formal motions to limit ramp usage failed, Judith turned to complaining that the ramps obstructed the view of Elmridge's carefully landscaped flower beds from the street. She even wrote letters to the building management, urging them to reduce the number of ramps. They responded politely that accessibility laws and the building's design demanded each entrance be fully accessible. Foiled again, Judith's frustration grew. Her next step would be drastically more direct and illegal. While Judith fumed, daily life at Elmridge Seniors Residences continued peacefully. The complex housed about 60 residents, ranging in age from mid-60s to late 90s. Marjorie Gleason, a 78-year-old retired librarian, organized a small reading club that met in the common lounge. Walter Rivers, a former engineer in his 80s, tinkered with gadgets in his unit, sometimes fixing neighbors' hearing aids or electric wheelchairs. Lillian Cho, spry at 72, led gentle yoga sessions on the lawn. Most residents relished the slow pace and neighborly bonds. A few used wheelchairs full-time, others occasionally borrowed them for extended outings. The multiple ramps made everyday tasks simpler. rolling out the front door to grab mail, or heading down the short slope to the sidewalks for an evening stroll. They also provided vital safety. If any single ramp needed repairs or was blocked by deliveries, a second or third ramp was always available. Once in a while, the seniors heard rumors that someone on the HOA board disliked their complex's design. But the building manager, Teresa Ramos, assured them that the city required these ramps for ADA compliance. No single board member could forcibly remove them. So the seniors carried on, never expecting that their routine accessibility would become a battlefield. In the background, Judith seethed, documenting each ramp's dimensions, taking photos from different angles. She convinced herself the ramps were an affront to the clean lines of the architecture. She wrote in her personal journal that excess ramps degrade the neighborhood's visual harmony. Her obsession grew to the point that she contemplated sabotage. And sabotage, indeed, was on the horizon. One Tuesday evening, the monthly HOA meeting gathered at the Rivergate Springs Community Center. Residents trickled in, mostly to discuss routine matters, lawn care schedules, next quarter's budget, an upcoming 4th of July picnic. The seniors from Elm Ridge rarely attended in large numbers, since their building had partial autonomy. But that evening, a few came to hear updates on a rumored walkway project in the broader neighborhood. Judith, perched at the board table, saw an opportunity. During the open forum, she launched into a diatribe. We need to address the glaring redundancy at Elm Ridge Seniors, those numerous wheelchair ramps. They block scenic views, are rarely used at the same time, and frankly degrade the property's facade. Perhaps we can propose a more consolidated solution. A hush fell. HOA President Gloria Shepard frowned, glancing at the seniors in attendance. Marjorie Gleason politely raised her hand. Excuse me, Ms. Harrington, but many of us rely on these ramps daily. They are not decorative. Each serves a specific entrance and meets ADA guidelines. We'd be stranded if a ramp was removed or if 2 sets of steps led to the same door. Judith pressed on, ignoring Marjorie's point. But do we truly need so many? At least half could go, or be replaced by a single large ramp at each building. Think of the cost savings and maintenance. Another senior, George Milton, retorted, we handle our own building's maintenance, not the HOA. Our ramps cost you nothing. Murmurs of agreement spread. President Gloria, trying to calm the tension, reminded everyone that Elm Ridge's design preceded Judith's arrival and complied with all relevant regulations. The board had no authority to force a reduction in ramps. Judith's face reddened. She muttered about property values and visual clutter, but found no support. The meeting moved on, leaving her glaring at the seniors as if they'd personally insulted her. Stung by her defeat, Judith stewed at home. Late into the night, she paced her living room, rereading the ADA regulations online, searching for loopholes. She found none. The ramps were legally protected. She realized the board would never side with her. The seniors would never voluntarily remove them. The city building codes buttressed the status quo, unless the ramps were somehow compromised, forcing them to be removed for repairs. In a twisted logic, Judith imagined that if the seniors no longer had functional ramps, the board or the city might permit a single replacement ramp instead of multiple ones. She latched onto the idea. However, it required sabotage. In the back of her mind, she recognized the risk of criminal charges. But her fervor blinded her to reason. She rationalized, I'm just expediting the removal of an eyesore. Once they see how silly it is to maintain them, they'll consolidate them into a single ramp. She rummaged in her garage for tools. She came across a metal saw with sturdy blades, typically used for cutting fence posts, that might slice through the ramp's metal supports. She also found a crowbar and a heavy mallet. She planned the sabotage for a night when the seniors were likely asleep. She'd strike at 1 or 2 ramps to make a statement, then slip away. By morning, the ramps would be unusable, forcing a rethinking of the entire setup, she hoped. Though part of her felt a pang of guilt, she'd be endangering seniors reliant on those ramps. Her arrogance insisted this was for the greater good. She believed the ramps were purely aesthetic blights, not essential life tools. The date was set, a Thursday evening, after midnight, when the complex was dark and quiet. That Thursday night, the sky hung over Rivergate Springs with a low cloud cover, blotting out the moon. A faint drizzle slicked the sidewalks. Judith took it as a sign that fewer people would be outdoors. She donned dark clothing, a hooded jacket, and gloves. Quietly, she loaded her metal saw and other tools into the trunk of her car. Around 1 a.m., she drove to Elmridge Seniors' residences, parking behind a hedge near the side of one building, out of sight of streetlights. Rain pattered gently. She slipped out, tools in hand, and crept toward the nearest ramp. It was a wide, gently sloping metal walkway that extended from the building entrance to the sidewalk. She tested the surface with her gloved hand, wet but stable. She imagined older residents shuffling or rolling across this ramp daily. Crouching down, she found the support beams near the ramp's midpoint. She fired up the metal saw. A shrill whine cut through the quiet, and her heart pounded. She realized the noise was louder than she'd hoped. Fearful someone might hear, she pressed the blade quickly into the beam, sending sparks flicking in the dark. The metal ground under her assault. She managed to carve partially through one beam, then another. The ramp began to sag slightly. A light flickered in a nearby window. Panicked, Judith cut power to the saw, grabbed her tools, and scurried behind a row of shrubs. The window's curtain rustled, then stilled. After waiting a tense minute, she resumed, determined to finish the job. She hacked at the ramp's side rails, scoring deep gashes. The structure still stood, but it was compromised enough that heavier weight might cause further bending or collapse. Satisfied, she moved to a second ramp, repeating the sabotage in a slightly quicker manner. Finally, with adrenaline surging, she returned to her car. She tossed her tools in, removing her gloves and wiping sweat from her brow. The rain had intensified, washing away some metal shavings. She sped off into the night, pulse hammering. She told herself, they'll have to remove those battered ramps now. She never considered the immediate danger to any seniors who might attempt to use them first thing in the morning. At dawn, Walter Rivers, the retired engineer, rose early as usual. He enjoyed a brisk walk around the complex before settling down to coffee and crosswords. That morning, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the ramps slick. As he approached the main entrance of Building B, he noticed something off. The midsection of the ramp sagged, the metal edges warped. Alarmed, he leaned closer, seeing deep cuts in the beams. Huh, Walter murmured, a chill running through him. Looks like sabotage. He rushed inside to alert the building manager, Teresa Ramos. She joined him outside, gasping at the damage. She quickly called the police, while Walter checked the other ramps. Sure enough, the ramp at Building A showed similar hacking. The seniors from those buildings, as they awoke, gathered around in dismay. Marjorie Gleason, stepping outside, nearly cried. What if someone had rolled out here in the dark and fallen through? Teresa nodded gravely. They thanked fate that no one had been on the ramp during or after the sabotage. A couple of maintenance staff roped off the damaged ramps with caution tape. The remaining ramps, fortunately unharmed, could still be used. But the shock and fear lingered. Who would do such a thing? When the police arrived, they took statements and examined the damage. No cameras covered that side of the building. No obvious footprints, aside from some scuffed marks likely from the saboteur's shoes. The metal saw's slash lines were distinctive, but that alone didn't identify the culprit. The seniors expressed suspicion that perhaps it was a local troublemaker or some random vandal. A few whispered that maybe it was that HOA lady who disliked their ramps. But with no proof, they kept that suspicion to themselves. The story spread rapidly through Rivergate Springs. A wave of sympathy for Elmridge seniors rose, as well as indignation at the vandals' callousness. Meanwhile, in her home, Judith read the news with a grim satisfaction. She'd succeeded in forcing at least 2 ramps out of commission. She secretly hoped the building might consolidate to a single ramp now. She had no idea the seniors and local engineers would soon respond with an even bolder solution. In the days after the ramp slashing, repairs began. The building's insurance covered the cost, but the seniors still faced inconvenience. 2 entrances were temporarily unusable. Teresa Ramos arranged for a welding contractor to assess the structure. He confirmed the ramps could be fixed or replaced. Meanwhile, local news outlets picked up the story of someone sabotaging senior ramps, generating public outrage. Many suspected a culprit who loathed wheelchair accessibility, though they lacked names. Walter Rivers, the retired engineer, was deeply disturbed. He recognized how critical these ramps were and wanted to ensure no future sabotage left the seniors vulnerable. While brainstorming with Teresa, he recalled a concept from his old career: pop-out, or telescoping mechanisms, structures hidden from view, deployable only when needed. That sparked an idea. What if the ramps could be concealed under normal conditions, so a vandal wouldn't even see them? The sabotage would become impossible. Teresa was intrigued. But how do we hide a whole ramp? Walter explained that if the steps themselves were hollowed out, each step could harbor a retractable ramp segment. By default, the entry looked like standard stairs. But pressing a button or using a lever would cause the ramp sections to slide or fold out, bridging the steps. If done well, it'd be flush with the building's exterior, otherwise invisible to prying eyes. It sounded ambitious and expensive. Teresa wasn't sure if their budget could handle it. But the thought lingered. Maybe there was a simpler variant, like a hinged platform that folded out from beneath the steps, or segmented metal slides stowed under a top landing. This approach might outwit any saboteur, because you couldn't slash what you couldn't see. Teresa asked Walter to draft some sketches. Then they present the idea to the building owners or potential sponsors. Word of Walter's concept spread among the seniors. They found it exciting, like a James Bond gadget for wheelchair users. Some worried about complexity or maintenance, but many were enthused that they might turn tragedy into a groundbreaking example of accessible engineering. Meanwhile, Judith Harrington noticed talk about a new ramp system, though no details. She sneered, assuming the seniors were just fixing the old ramps. She had no clue they planned something far more advanced. Walter's sketches took shape quickly. He outlined a system of collapsible ramp segments that would slide on tracks below the steps. The top step would remain standard, but a user needing a ramp could activate a mechanism, perhaps via a small motor or even a manual crank, to extend each metal panel outward. Combined, these panels formed a continuous slope from top to bottom. When retracted, they'd nest under the steps, invisible. Teresa arranged a meeting with the building's management company. They loved the concept, but balked at potential costs. Retrofitting steps with concealed compartments, installing motors or slide rails, ensuring structural integrity. It all sounded expensive. The complex's insurance only covered standard ramp repairs or replacements, not a novel system. The building's modest budget already stretched to daily maintenance. Where could they find extra tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars? That's when the community rally began. Angered by the sabotage, local residents, businesses, and nonprofits offered donations. A few local charities that supported seniors or disability access pitched in. A philanthropic foundation in the next town heard about the project and expressed interest in partial sponsorship, seeing it as an innovative solution that might scale to other buildings. Even the municipal government, wanting to demonstrate commitment to seniors, pledged a small grant. Slowly, the puzzle pieces aligned. If the seniors chipped in some of their own funds, and the building management took out a small loan, the engineering project could become reality. Teresa suggested a staged approach. Pilot the hidden ramp system at one building entrance, then expand if successful. Walter was thrilled. He refined the design, factoring in cost-saving measures like partial manual operation or simpler track systems. Despite the complexity, excitement pulsed through Elm Ridge. They might soon have a high-tech solution that turns sabotage into an impetus for progress. Once the project's feasibility took shape, Teresa and Walter decided to announce it publicly, partly to encourage more donations. They held a small press event in Elm Ridge's Common Lounge, inviting local news, city officials, and the philanthropic groups. They unveiled prototypes of the pop-out ramp, showing 3D printed models and detailed diagrams. Walter explained how each step concealed a sliding panel that would align seamlessly to form a gentle slope. Everyone oohed and awed at the idea. Seniors in attendance beamed with pride. For them, it wasn't just about fancy technology. It was about preserving their independence and ensuring no saboteur could easily destroy their means of access again. The media lapped up the story. Seniors innovate hidden ramps after vandal strikes. Eager headlines praised the ingenuity, painting Elm Ridge as a beacon of resilience. Judith Harrington watched these developments with a mix of shock and anger. She'd never expected them to come up with a revolutionary concept. She was certain they'd replace the damaged ramps with a simpler standard ramp. Now, They threatened to overshadow her sabotage with something even more permanent and, ironically, less visible from the street. Her entire premise of preserving the view might be turned on its head if the new system was effectively invisible. She fumed, searching for a new angle to attack. Despite facing widespread support, the hidden ramp plan wasn't guaranteed. Zoning approvals, building permits, and architectural reviews were needed. This gave Judith an opening. She sat down with the city's building code, scanning for any clause that might bar complicated retractable ramps. She found references to standard slope ratios, surface materials, safety rails, and more. She latched onto possible concerns: mechanical reliability, fire egress codes, and complexities about emergency usage. Armed with these details, Judith scheduled a meeting with the city's building department, presenting herself as an HOA representative concerned about public safety. She insisted that collapsible ramps might fail during a power outage or jam halfway, trapping seniors. She argued that the city's codes didn't explicitly permit hidden, slide-out ramps. She claimed it was an untested concept that might violate emergency egress rules. City officials, somewhat taken aback, acknowledged the concept was unusual. They assured Judith that the plans would undergo thorough review. If the system met or exceeded ADA requirements and was tested for reliability, it could pass. Judith, unsatisfied, demanded stricter scrutiny. She also filed a formal complaint with the City Planning Commission, labeling the project highly experimental and potentially lethal in an emergency. In effect, she tried to bog the seniors' plan in red tape. Word of her complaints reached Elmridge. The seniors felt frustrated but not surprised. Walter calmly explained to Teresa they'd have to prove robust fail-safes, manual override in case of power loss, clear signage, and compliance with every dimension rule. So they pressed forward, determined to meet or exceed every standard, leaving no doubt the system was safe and code-compliant. Recognizing the technical complexity, Walter recruited assistance from younger professionals. One volunteer was Benita Alvarez, a mechanical engineering grad student who had read about the sabotage in the news. She offered her expertise in modeling the sliding panels, ensuring stable deployment even under weight. Another was Charlie Weiss, a local architectural designer who specialized in universal design and was eager to help seniors. Walter, Benita, and Charlie formed a small design lab in the Elmridge Lounge, using donated computer equipment to run simulations. They tested various materials for the ramp panels: lightweight aluminum alloys or high-strength composites with skid-resistant surfaces. They hashed out how to integrate safety rails that popped up automatically with the panels. They factored in a manual crank system if the motor failed, ensuring no occupant was stranded. Each day, they progressed. The philanthropic group pledged additional funds if the design passed city inspection. The municipal building department, seeing the thoroughness of their approach, showed cautious optimism. They'd require extensive testing, but they were open-minded about granting an approval if the final design proved stable and safe. Meanwhile, Judith realized her public safety angle might not succeed if the engineers overcame every obstacle. She considered more direct sabotage, like interfering with the prototypes or harassing the design team. But after the initial ramp slashing, the seniors had installed security cameras around the site. Another act of vandalism risked immediate detection. She grit her teeth, waiting to see if the city would deliver a final blow. If not, she'd have to scheme further. In the following months, Walter's team submitted formal plans to the city's building department, including detailed structural drawings, stress test analyses, and a demonstration of how the ramps would meet or exceed ADA slope and railing guidelines. City officials scheduled a hearing to review the plan, inviting public comments. Judith used this platform to present her dire warnings about mechanical failures, brandishing a doomsday scenario in which seniors were locked out or stuck in an emergency. But to her dismay, a wave of support overshadowed her negativity. Several seniors testified how sabotage had threatened their safety and how an innovative hidden ramp would protect them from future vandalism. Others pointed out that, when retracted, the system would be invisible, thus ironically preserving the view that Judith had claimed to want. The philanthropic sponsor also spoke, highlighting the thorough engineering behind it. Even some city officials seemed impressed by the forward-thinking design. In the end, The building department granted preliminary approval with conditions. The system had to pass third-party safety inspections, and a final on-site test must prove it functioned reliably under load. The seniors rejoiced. The press covered the hearing, praising the potential for a landmark in accessible design. Judith glowered in the audience, her protests drowned by applause. Shaken by the city's willingness to greenlight the plan, Judith turned to the Rivergate Springs HOA itself. She demanded an emergency board session to discuss improper architectural alterations at Elmridge. Although the complex had certain exemptions, she argued the new ramp system represented a major modification that needed the HOA's blessing. At that session, Judith ranted, "This contraption is an eyesore in waiting. If it fails, it tarnishes the whole neighborhood. Our covenants require consistent external appearances. Hidden ramps with motorized slides do not align with the rest of Rivergate Springs." However, the other board members, Gloria, Morris, and the rest, pointed out that the seniors had already complied with city codes. The complex had its own design guidelines, and the new system was arguably less obtrusive than the old ramps. Judith tried a rhetorical pivot, claiming the large budget for these ramps might require special HOA oversight. Morris, the treasurer, scoffed politely. "The seniors found private sponsors. They're not using HOA funds, so we have no financial stake." In frustration, Judith threatened that the project could lower property values if it malfunctioned. But no evidence supported that claim. The board voted 4-1 to let Elmridge proceed without further HOA interference. Another humiliating defeat for Karen. With official approvals in hand, the seniors set a timeline. The plan was to retrofit the front entrance of Building B first, where sabotage had occurred, as a pilot. Once tested, they'd do the same for Buildings A and C. Construction commenced with partial demolition of the existing steps, removing the damaged ramp entirely, and preparing a recessed space for the sliding panels. Curious neighbors gathered to watch. Excitement rippled among the seniors. Some had never seen large-scale engineering up close. The philanthropic group posted updates on social media, praising the synergy of young engineers and older residents bridging generational gaps. Judith sneered from a distance, snapping photos to find potential code violations. She noted each day's progress, hoping to see cracks or structural flaws. But the crew was meticulous, guided by Walter's blueprint. They installed robust steel tracks beneath the steps. Each step's riser had a hidden cavity for the ramp segment. When retracted, it formed a seamless facade. A small control panel near the door would let a user deploy or stow the ramp. For emergency use, a manual lever was accessible behind a locked panel. After weeks of careful work, the system neared completion. The entire building buzzed with anticipation. The sabotage's memory still stung, but that dark act had birthed something extraordinary. The last step was final inspections and a public unveiling. Meanwhile, rumors circulated that Judith might plan another sabotage. So the seniors installed a ring of motion sensor cameras. If she tried anything, they'd catch her in the act. A sunny Saturday morning was chosen for the big reveal. City officials, donors, local press, and excited residents gathered around Building B's entrance. A temporary rope barrier separated the small crowd from the steps. Teresa Ramos welcomed everyone, summarizing how vandalism had spurred them to reimagine accessible design. Walter Rivers, looking dapper in a suit jacket, stood by a control panel. The mayor gave a short congratulatory speech, praising the seniors' resilience. Then came the moment of truth. Walter pressed a button, and with a soft mechanical hum, each step's front panel slid outward, pivoting down until a continuous slope formed from top to bottom. The crowd gasped, applauding. A few seniors cheered. The ramp surface locked into place with a reassuring click. Then Deborah Lyons, an 80-year-old in a wheelchair, volunteered to be the first to test it. She rolled forward, ascending the slope smoothly. Another round of applause erupted. Local reporters snapped photos. One exclaimed, "It's like magic. The steps literally transform into a ramp." Walter beamed, explaining that while the concept was complex, the function was user-friendly. If someone needed stairs, they simply retracted the ramp. In ramp mode, rails rose from the edges automatically. The city inspector present gave a thumbs up, remarking that all safety boxes had been ticked. Judith stood at the back, scowling. She recognized the system was a brilliant compromise, unobtrusive steps for daily visual harmony, plus a ramp when needed. It undercut her entire argument about ugly ramps. Furious, she left before the ceremony ended, ignoring neighbors who waved politely. The seniors, on the other hand, lingered, celebrating with refreshments. They all recognized that their triumph was also a victory for accessible design. Though the pilot ramp's unveiling went smoothly, a few more steps remained. Extended load testing, reliability trials over weeks, and final city certification. The building management felt confident, given how thoroughly they'd prepared. They soon planned to replicate the system at the other building entrances. Judith, however, refused to concede defeat. She believed she needed one last push to prove the contraption was flawed. That push arrived in the form of a minor malfunction. One day, the ramp extended but stalled for a moment halfway out. The occupant using it was safe, but had to wait an extra minute while a staff member reset the mechanism. Gossip about the glitch spread fast. Judith pounced, sending letters to the building department. Evidence of mechanical failure at new ramp. Urgent reevaluation needed. The city responded by requesting a formal incident report. Walter clarified it was a trivial software bug, quickly fixed. A patch to the motor's control board resolved it. The city accepted the explanation, but demanded repeated tests to confirm no further stalls. This gave Judith hope. She publicly insisted, "This glitch shows it's unsafe. Time to revert to a standard single-ramp solution." However, her pleas fell on deaf ears. The seniors reminded everyone that mechanical doors, elevators, and other systems can glitch occasionally, but remain widely used. The building department recognized that as well. As final testing progressed smoothly, Judith grew more frantic. She concluded sabotage was her only recourse. But the newly installed cameras and the robust design left few vulnerabilities. She fantasized about pouring acid on the track or interfering with the control panel. Yet that risked immediate capture and likely arrest. Painted into a corner, she hovered near meltdown. One late evening, under the pretense of a walk, Judith approached Building B's newly installed ramp system. She peered around, noticing the cameras overhead. She tried to pick a blind spot, but the coverage was comprehensive. She carried a small battery-powered tool in her handbag, hoping to slash at the newly installed track edges. If she could jam them, maybe the ramp would fail again. However, as soon as she stepped near the steps, a motion sensor triggered a bright spotlight. She froze like a deer, realizing any move would be recorded. Indeed, a camera pivoted, focusing on her. Panicking, she feigned a cough, pretended to examine a loose shoelace, and hurried away. She realized sabotage was nearly impossible now. The seniors, battered once, had grown wise. She cursed under her breath, feeling her illusions of controlling the neighborhood slip further. A security guard the seniors hired for nights had also spotted her. He quietly took note of the time and recognized her face from the earlier fiasco. Though no crime was committed that moment, it underscored the vigilance around Elmridge. The next day, the guard reported the incident to Teresa, who sighed, grateful no damage had occurred. The seniors, hearing of it, felt pity. Judith's obsession was so deep that she lurked about at night. They resolved to keep the security measures strong. Despite Judith's meddling, the pilot ramp performed well in further tests. The city's building department gave final certification, praising the design's thoroughness. Enthused, Elmridge management greenlit retrofitting the other entrances. Over the next few months, contractors carefully demolished the older ramps, some still bearing slash marks, replaced steps, and installed more hidden ramp modules. Each new set improved upon the pilot's design, with minor tweaks for reliability. All told, it was a triumph. Instead of fewer ramps, Elmridge ended up with more robust, invisible solutions at every entrance. The building's facade, from the street, now appeared ramp-free. Aesthetically, it satisfied even the pickiest eye. And for seniors, pushing a small button or cranking the lever conjured a safe, stable slope. Sabotage was nearly impossible. No rails or beams sat exposed. Once retracted, all you saw were standard steps. Media coverage continued. Journalists hailed Elmridge's transformation as the future of accessible design. Some wondered if the blueprint could spread to other institutions, schools, offices, or older buildings that struggled with permanent ramps. The philanthropic sponsor teased that they might patent the design or open source it for nonprofits. Walter, with tears in his eyes, said he never expected to spearhead such an invention in his retirement. Ironically, the Rivergate Springs HOA board convened that quarter to discuss any issues. The newly installed hidden ramps at Elmridge topped the agenda. Without a single complaint filed, beyond Judith's earlier protests, the board was free to assess the final outcome. They examined pictures and heard a short presentation from Teresa and Walter about how the system worked. Board President Gloria smiled, turning to Judith. "Miss Harrington, you initially had concerns about the seniors' ramps blocking the view. Now that they're invisible when retracted, I assume you have no further objections." The entire room sensed the subtext. The seniors had inadvertently satisfied her aesthetic demands. Yet from her expression, Judith took no comfort in the result. She muttered something about "time will tell" and refrained from praising the design. Meanwhile, the rest of the board expressed genuine admiration, commending the seniors for their resourcefulness. A formal motion passed. The HOA recognized the new ramps as an innovative and compliant approach, with no violation of neighborhood appearance. They actually gave a small token award to Elmridge for architectural creativity. The seniors, though polite, felt the irony. Judith's sabotage had spurred a solution that not only overcame her objection, but also garnered the HOA's official praise. She slumped in her seat, quietly fuming. As months rolled by, the hidden ramp system became the new norm at Elmridge. Residents found it intuitive. Even visitors marveled at how swiftly the steps transformed into a slope. Life returned to calm. The sabotage incident faded into memory, though the seniors never forgot the fear it instilled. They were relieved such an ordeal had led to an unexpectedly beneficial outcome. Judith Harrington became increasingly isolated. Neighbors learned she likely was behind the sabotage, though no official charges were filed. The seniors never publicly accused her by name, lacking direct evidence. But rumors abounded. People noticed how she refused to attend block socials or community events. She lost her re-election bid on the HOA board, replaced by a more moderate homeowner who valued cooperative solutions over aggression. Meanwhile, each time Judith drove past Elmridge, she saw no ramps from the street, just a neat facade. The view was indeed preserved, yet that only deepened her resentment. She tried to remove the ramps entirely, but the result was a more advanced ramp system that outsmarted her. She realized she had no further recourse. Any future sabotage attempt would be instantly caught on camera. Reluctantly, she ceded defeat. At some point, she considered moving, though she hadn't listed her house. She retreated into private bitterness, a self-styled victim of a neighborhood that refused to adopt her vision. The seniors found it tragic that she never learned empathy from the ordeal, but they continued living joyfully, unburdened by her negativity. Walter Rivers, once the quiet retiree, became something of a local hero. The city recognized him for spearheading a groundbreaking accessibility project. Benita Alvarez and Charlie Weiss, the younger engineers, took part in conferences presenting the Elmridge design as a successful case study in adaptive architecture. A wave of interest from other senior facilities, churches, and libraries poured in. Some sought advice on how to replicate or adapt the idea. Though Walter insisted it was a team effort, many credited his calm leadership. He remained humble, focusing on the residents' well-being. He occasionally gave tours of the hidden ramps to architects or city officials from across the state. The philanthropic sponsor toyed with patenting the design, but eventually decided to make the concept widely available, hoping to spark a new era of universal design. For the seniors at Elmridge, the daily result was simpler. They enjoyed safe, sabotage-proof accessibility. The forward steps no longer blocked them or forced them to rely on a singled-out ramp. If a senior approached with a walker or wheelchair, the sliding panels whirred out, granting them immediate passage. If no one needed it, the steps stayed standard, and no meddling Karen would ever slash an exposed ramp beam again. Though Elmridge was a small portion of Rivergate Springs, the story of sabotage turned triumph had a ripple effect. Neighborhood attitudes toward accessibility improved. Some single-family homeowners asked for tips on adding mini-ramps or platform lifts to help older relatives or guests. The HOA, initially known for strict uniformity, found itself advocating for inclusive modifications. President Gloria Shepherd even proposed a new bylaw clause protecting reasonable accessibility features from aesthetic complaints. Among the younger families, the saga became a cautionary tale about blind rule enforcement versus empathy. They admired how the seniors calmly overcame vandalism with creativity. The entire community learned that accessibility wasn't just a legal requirement, it was a moral imperative, reinforcing the dignity of all residents. Judith Harrington's meltdown, ironically, catalyzed a gentler, more caring environment. People realized that behind each ramp or handrail was a real person who needed it. The adversity stoked empathy. In many ways, the neighborhood came out stronger, forging new bonds across generational lines. Some months after all the ramps were replaced, an unexpected visitor arrived at Elmridge, a middle-aged man wearing a flustered expression. He introduced himself to Teresa as Mark Harrington, Judith's cousin. He explained that he'd heard of the sabotage story and wanted to apologize on behalf of their family. "Judith's always been intense," he admitted. "But we didn't realize she'd gone this far. I'm sorry for the distress she caused." Teresa accepted his apology with grace. "We harbor no grudges. Actually, what she did was terrible, but the outcome was this amazing new system," she said, gesturing at the hidden ramp steps. Mark marveled, pressing the button to see the panels extend. He praised the design and left with a quieter heart, hoping one day Judith might see reason. The seniors parted ways with Mark, reflecting on how fear and hostility could sometimes lead to breakthroughs. They harbored no illusions that Judith would transform overnight, but they believed in the capacity of any person to eventually realize their mistakes. In the meantime, they moved forward, enjoying the safety and convenience of the new ramps. In the end, the sabotage that began with a vengeful, misguided Karen yielded a powerful lesson for Rivergate Springs. The drive to forcibly remove or degrade the seniors' ramps backfired spectacularly, spurring a hidden ramp innovation that was even more permanent, protected, and visually discreet. Elmridge Seniors' residences thrived. The older generation lived comfortably, rolling or walking freely in and out of entrances that doubled as normal steps for visitors. The advanced design attracted architectural tours, media coverage, and academic interest. Meanwhile, daily life continued in quiet contentment. Coffee gatherings on the porch, bingo nights in the lounge, and heartfelt neighborly support. As for Judith Harrington, she remained a peripheral figure in the neighborhood. Over time, she withdrew from community activities entirely. Some rumored she might sell her house. Others saw her walking in the early morning with a scowl. The seniors didn't dwell on her. They had replaced pain with progress, fear with forward momentum. They'd proven that cruelty, like slashing a ramp, could spark an even stronger communal resilience. Across Rivergate Springs, the motto spread, "If they break it, we'll build it better and hide it from them." Indeed, the hidden ramps exemplified how unstoppable kindness and ingenuity could be. The seniors had taken tragedy, combined it with creativity, and built a lasting symbol of inclusion. No matter how fiercely one Karen might rage, the spirit of compassion soared higher, like unstoppable seeds planted in concrete, blossoming in hidden mechanical triumph.